it's critical that you are the one that's documenting these 8 steps. The burden is going to be on you. If in 5 years from today, the deal goes south and there's a regulator that's breathing down your neck and they're saying, hey, John Doe here's in your investment, he's claiming he didn't know you. Did you have a pre-existing substantive relationship? You should be able to go into your files and pull the files to actually prove that you documented these 8 steps. All right, well, welcome back to Real Estate Syndicator Live, episode 42. And as many of you know, that when we're out there raising capital and we're using probably the most popular exemption, 506B, we all know that one of the main prohibitions on a 506B deal is that you are not allowed to generally solicit or advertise. And the way that we usually handle that, or the way we usually prove that we did not advertise or generally solicit, is by having what we call a pre-existing substantive relationship. And the question always should be showing up and does come up is, well, what exactly does that mean? What constitutes a substantive relationship so that we can have then a pre-existing substantive relationship? And unlike most of the securities laws out there, we talk about an offer, we talk about, reasonable stuff. Everything tends to be very nebulous, seems to be very, not very clear, open for interpretation. One of my favorites is, conditioning the market is probably my favorite one when we're talking about social media advertising. But what in the world is what in the world is conditioning the market really mean? But when it comes to substantive relationship, this is one of the few areas where we actually have some very clear guidance from the SEC. And that's whenever you hear me talking about these 8 steps, which is what we're going to talk about today, these 8 steps that you should be taking in order to take a complete stranger, somebody you just met at a conference or at some event. What are the 8 steps that you need to follow? These are 8 steps that the SEC has actually given us guidance for. And this comes from a no action letter, and I'll explain that in a second, but a no action letter called Citizen VC, which you can it's all over the internet. You can Google it. It's a 2 or 3 page letter that's written by a securities attorney. And what happens with no action letters is basically that you're not clear about something. For example, we could probably write a no action letter on, conditioning the market and say, hey, here's what we plan on doing. We don't believe this is conditioning the market, or we don't believe this is, or we do believe that these things are going to be a substantive relationship. So we send this letter to the SEC and say, hey, if we comply, if you take these as true, what's in my letter, and I comply with that, will you take no action against me? That's really what a no action letter is. And most of the time, the SEC ignores you, right? You write a letter, you ask them for some guidance, and they completely blow you off. But in this particular case, they actually did give us guidance. And these are sort of the 8 steps that this company called Citizen VC, which is a venture capital firm, they said, look, we're going to be putting stuff on our website. And here are the processes and procedures that we have in place. And we believe that if we follow these 8 steps, we should be good. We should not be considered generally soliciting or advertising. We should be considered having a substantive relationship. And the SEC actually agreed with them and said, yes, if you follow these 8 steps, we will take no action against you. Now, that no action letter technically is specifically for Citizen VC only, but it obviously gives us an insight as to what the SEC, what steps they consider as proper procedure. And so we don't have to necessarily comply with all 8. This isn't like a rule that's anywhere, but obviously it's best practice to comply as close to all 8 of these as you can, because the more of those you do, the better. And so without further ado, let's go through all 8 of them, and I'll get a little bit of a sort of a backstory to some of these, but there's 2 that are probably the most important ones of these 8. So the first one is, you want to send them a questionnaire. That's number 1. Usually it's an online questionnaire. It could be something that pops up on your website or however you want to do it. But in the Citizen CC, it was literally an online questionnaire. And it's a questionnaire to gather information about the prospective investor, right? This is not your typical, like, hey, how much do you make? What's your favorite color? It's a pretty detailed questionnaire that I always analogize to the questionnaire that you fill out when you are opening a margin account or an options account on your brokerage account. They're asking you all these questions about what are your goals? Are you conservative? Are you aggressive? What are you trying to accomplish? It's a much more detailed questionnaire. And at some point it was actually on the website for Citizen VC, and for some reason I didn't capture it. And so everybody was coming up with their own questions. I actually have a questionnaire that I put together that I think is pretty good, and you're welcome to steal it. And if you somehow I'll get you a copy of that, but I've got a questionnaire for you guys. But that's going to be step one. Send them that questionnaire as that preliminary information gathering so that you have some idea of what their net worth is, what their level of experience. Are they looking for cash flow? Are they looking for, appreciation? Are they conservative? Are they, aggressive? Like that kind of information is what this questionnaire is meant to do. The next critical step, again, these two being the most important, is actually having an offline conversation with them. And this can be in person, theoretically, a cup of coffee, dinner, a drink or whatever, but it certainly could be a Zoom call. And I think in Citizen VC, it was a telephone call with somebody in your organization. It's meant to sort of be an introductory call with some representative of your company, where again, you're probably going through the questionnaire and you're just trying to understand a little bit more about the particular investor that you're talking about. You're looking to discuss, their investment experience and the level of sophistication, their, investment goals, their, whether this is a suitable investment for them. This issue of suitability always pops up, what their risk awarenesses are. And again, just anything that will foster or get you to understand whether this person is sophisticated and whether this particular investment for you is suitable for them. The classic example is always, you don't want to be, talking to the little 80-year-old widower and offering them, some high fly risk product. You want to make sure that this is a suitable investment for somebody. If they're 80 or 90 years old, they probably need cash flow investments. And so you probably shouldn't be offering them some development project that's not going to spin off any cash flow for many, many years. So that's the purpose of the meeting. Again, I think these days we're talking about a Zoom call. And again, it doesn't have to be you. It can be anybody from your organization. But again, the idea is to document sort of their investment experience. The other six are a little bit random or minor. You can probably fulfill most of these pretty easily. That's why I really focus usually on the first two, which is the questionnaire and the meeting. Number three is you want to send them an introductory email. That's what Citizen VC did. Again, introducing yourself and your company and what you guys are all about. And then you want to be contacting the investor, online as well. So in terms of emails, but anything to be able to answer questions that they have about the company, about your investment philosophy, and about your investment goals. Just encouraging them to ask the questions. Because again, the idea is not only for you to find out information about them and find out whether this is a suitable investment for them, whether they're sophisticated or not, but it's also an opportunity for them to ask you questions and make sure that you guys are aligned, that, they agree with your premise and your philosophy. So what the SEC is really looking for, and they actually mentioned this in the letter, is that they're looking for that fostering of the relationship, right? That's really what they're looking for. They're less concerned maybe in terms of like making sure you're checking the boxes on all of these 8 steps, but they really want to make sure that you're taking the time to find out whether they're, sophisticated enough. And sophistication is quite simply, do they have the requisite financial and business expertise to sort of evaluate the risks and the merits of your investment? That's what you're really trying to figure out. Do they understand what they're talking about? And again, you want them to be asking you questions. SEC was very clear that there's no magic timeline, right? So this is not, irrespective of whether it's a week or 10 days or 2 months or 3-touch rule. I mean, none of that stuff matters. It really is making sure they're fostering that relationship. Number 5, I'll be honest with you, I don't think many people do, but it's one of the 8, so I'm going to tell it to you. But in Citizen VC, they actually pulled a third-party credit service. Number 1, to confirm the identity so they can make sure that they're not falsifying their identity, but also to get some additional financial information. Obviously, when you pull a credit report, you can see how much debt there are, what their sort of liabilities are. And so you know how much they make. And again, you're trying to figure out if this is a sophisticated prospective investor. Again, your number 6 is you want to encourage them to explore your website, ask questions about your strategy. It's actually not a bad idea. And this is something that you can do. Is even though they're not eligible for your current deal that you have, you can certainly go through that business plan. I mean, if this is a good example of, hey, here's a live deal that we have right now. You're not eligible. You can't invest in this, but this will give you a good idea of the types of investment that we like to look for, the markets that we like, our strategy, whether it's value add, whatever cash flow, whatever the strategy is. But that's something that you could absolutely talk to them about. And maybe it's a good idea to have that conversation in that first 1 or 2 calls that you're having over Zoom, is maybe not only going through the questionnaire, but say, hey, here's a couple of deals that we've done in the past so that you can have an idea of the type of investments that we make. Number 7, again, they specifically talk about generally fostering that interaction. So whatever else it takes, whether it's more phone calls or emails or Slack or whatever technology you want to use, you want to foster that relationship and get that interaction going between the prospective. And then the other thing they talked about, number 8, is just advising them that there's going to be a significant minimum investment, right? I mean, I don't think there's too many. I think I've done any deals lately that have been less than $50,000, but that's the number that they were using in Citizen VC, that, hey, there's going to be a significant minimum investment in this, probably no less than $50,000. And that was one of the 8 steps or communication things that they wanted to do. But that's what the 8 steps are. And again, you don't have to do all 8. If you did 7 out of 8, it's probably a good thing. But I would encourage you guys at a minimum to do the first 2. I mean, the questionnaire and the phone call are by far the most important ones. It used to be that some people just thought that they could do a questionnaire, but ultimately what we're trying to figure out is that fostering of those relationships. So anyway, that was kind of my little blurb there about the 8 steps. I don't know if you guys have, let's see if you guys have specific questions on the 8 steps or just sort of pre-existing relationships in general. Now, one thing I forgot to mention that's actually really, really important. So before I get into questions, it's critical that you are the one that's documenting these 8 steps. Right? The burden is going to be on you, that if in 5 years, I always think of 5 years down the line, if in 5 years from today, the deal goes south and there's a regulator that's breathing down your neck and they're saying, hey, John Doe, here's in your investment, you know, did you advertise? Or he's claiming he didn't know you. Did you have a pre-existing substantive relationship? You should be able to go into your files and pull the files to actually prove that you documented these 8 steps. Questionnaire should be fairly easy because you're going to have a copy of questionnaire. The phone call, you can do, you know, I've got clients that actually record that call. I think that's not a bad way to go. You could record the call, file it away in some folder, and then if anything were to happen, then you can run and get that transcribed and put it into some kind of a summary. But whether you record it, whether you take really detailed notes, you've got to be able to say, hey, look, on this particular date, you know, December 20th of 2022, we had a phone call for 20 minutes and here are the things we discussed and this is what I learned and all that stuff. So just kind of keep really detailed records, because the burden's going to be on you to prove that you had this pre-existing substantive relationship. And the last thing I'll say is that the relationship that has to be not only substantive, which is what we talked about, but it has to be a pre-existing substantive relationship. And that means pre-existing the offer. Now that's a little bit more nebulous. Like, when does the offer actually commence? That's up for interpretation. I've heard some people argue that once you've hired the attorney, that's when your offering is commenced. I think that's in many instances way too late. I mean, anytime theoretically you're talking to a particular prospect and you're talking about the specific deal that you're under contract, that's going to be the offering. But that is going to be a little bit more nebulous. Certainly, if you've started sending emails out, if there's anything that's publicly available that shows that you've been talking to people about your particular investment, it's going to be there. You know, maybe you could use the date that you got into contract, or at least got an LOI accepted. That could be potentially a date. But try not to cut it too close on those particular dates. But you have to have a pre-existing relationship, which means pre-existing the offering, which of course means that once that offering begins, whenever you decide that date is what we're going to go with, then anybody that you meet at that point moving forward is not going to be eligible for your current deal. You have to, once you've established that substantive relationship and you say, look, today is the day, I've taken these 8 steps, I'm comfortable that I know this person well enough, that they're sophisticated, that this is a suitable investment for them, I'm going with today's the day, then you cannot offer them their current deal. They're now eligible for your future deal. And that's how the pre-existing piece works. But a lot of people sometimes forget the pre-existing piece. Johannes, hey, how you doing, buddy? You said, would you record the phone call for proof? Yeah, I'm telling you, some clients do it. Now, you know, there's different laws relating to that. It's a state-by-state issue. At a minimum, I would just be getting their permission to say, hey, look, is it okay that we record this? I'm just keeping it for my file. So you want to get their permission for recording. But to me, that sounds like the easiest one. There's also a lot of transcription services. We use one just for our meetings in general. It's called, it's Otter, but there's a ton of them that are out there. So having your meeting transcribed would be another easy way to get the documentation done, or just take some really good notes. I mean, again, there's nothing that says one way or the other. I see a hand up. Alan, look at you, A student over here. You want to just unmute and you can ask your question.
Yeah. Referrals. We people we met at like a conference, we've kept in touch with them, several phone calls with them, and then he referred his dad.
I know that's a little bit, I don't say it's controversial, but there's some disagreements. What I can tell you is that the SEC has been very clear that having a pre-existing substantive relationship is one way, but not the exclusive way that you can show that you did not generally solicit or advertise. That's smack in their Q&A that they have, the CD&I, they basically have a bunch of Q&A. So that's, I forget what the number is. I can find it for you, but that's in black and white. And so referrals to me are fine. Now, you don't want to go crazy and you don't want to be, again, you tell people referrals are great. And then they're like, hey, can I convince somebody to put me on stage? And so I can count that as a referral. No, I'm talking about legit referrals, meaning you've got ideally an investor that says, hey, I'm invested and I'm either investing again, or maybe, I don't have enough, I don't have capital for this line, right? But I've got my relative or my buddy or whatever, and I want to invite him. Same thing with our webinars. I mean, you're obviously inviting people into your webinars that you have pre-existing substantive relationships, but if they want to bring in a friend of theirs or bring in, a family member, this father, that would be great. Now, you still want to have even though you don't have that pre-existing substantive relationship, you still want to go through the process and getting to know them, because you still have to make sure that this investment is suitable for them and that they're sophisticated. So you're doing it maybe potentially for other reasons, not to show that you have a substantive relationship, but you still want to be able to show this investment is suitable for them. So you still have to ask them questions, you still got to figure out how much they make, what their investment goals and all that stuff. But at that point, if it's a referral, you're not going to have a pre-existing substantive relationship. But again, a referral, you're clearly did not generally solicit or advertise. That's really what the rule says. The rule doesn't say you have to have a pre-existing relationship. The rule says you are prohibited from generally soliciting or advertising.
Okay. I think we're good then. Hey, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Michael's in the house. Hey, Michael, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Mauricio?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. So I'm going to go with Alan's question. I just did a raise and I had a fellow platinum partner invest in what I'm doing, and he referred his mother.
Yeah.
And a conversation on the phone, and I asked some net worth liquidity kind of questions and if they've invested in private placements before. And I figured that was good enough to bring him in, because I've known this other guy for 2 years that he actually invested and then brought his parents along with him.
Yeah, I'm good with the referrals. I would encourage you to go through the 8 steps as well. I mean, again, there's no harm. Hey, here's the questionnaire. Let's hop on a call for sure. And then look, you saw me kind of fly through them, because there's really not, sending an email, how long does that take? An introductory email, that's probably something you're going to do anyway. And then just trying to encourage them, because you're trying to find out, you're not trying to find at that point whether they're, you have a substantive relationship with it, but you are trying to figure out whether this person is sophisticated, right? You've got to convince yourself that they're sophisticated. And again, it's their mother. Like, I don't know how old they are. And, maybe they're saying, look, I'm conservative and I need cash flow. And your raise is a freaking, development deal coupled with crypto or something. I don't know, whatever. So that might not be right, but you've got to go through those steps anyway. But you don't have to have that pre-existing piece, is what I would argue on the referrals.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my favorite referral, is when you have an existing investor that refers either another investor or like you said, a family member is great.
Yep.
Good seeing you, Michael. Susanna.
Hi, Mauricio.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah.
My question is, can we offer incentives or any kind of gifts or anything in that nature for referrals?
No, I'm glad you asked that, because even though there's nothing wrong with referrals, if somebody starts referring people out of the goodness of their heart, or because obviously, it's a family member or it's a friend of mine, and hey, I really want to make that introduction, that's great, but you cannot compensate them. That's going to be what we call broker dealer activity. So unless they're licensed, which I'm going to assume they're not, you cannot pay for that referral. So thanks for asking that, because I keep kind of always gloss over that. A gift, again, technically, no. But if you want to send them a Christmas gift, I guess is, but legally you cannot compensate them in exchange for the referral. Thanks, Susanna. Douglas in the house. Hey, Douglas, how are you? Doug, you got a question? Your hand's up. Maybe not. Doug Dowell. Maybe he's not. Okay, no question there.
Not Doug Dowell. I'm not sure. I used his link. That's how I.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, your hand is up. You have a question?
Yeah, sure. Quick question.
Got it. Yeah.
So I have a family member who's doing a raise, not a 506B. If he were to theoretically want to compensate me, if he were to hire me as an employee, is there any way using that would work?
No. I mean, the exemption that we generally, the reason we can sometimes get compensated is what we call an issue. I'm going to get too in the weeds in this, but an issuer exemption is if you're part of if you're part of the sponsorship team, which actually in this case, you're not even really arguing that, but whether an employee or any affiliate of that company is going to be subject to those rules. So there's just no way you can do a transaction-based compensation. If they're an employee and they're incidentally, they're doing their work and they incidentally, again, we're actually talking about something different, right? Let me just backtrack, but we're not really talking about referrals. At this point, we're talking about raising capital as opposed to just making a referral. Or are you talking about straight up making a referral? Because if you're doing a referral, just by what, are you going to make somebody a W-2 employee just so that they can refer one person and you can compensate them? Is that the idea?
Let's say for argument's sake, though.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just the way around. The SEC is pretty good about that. I mean, they don't really care too much about how you structure things. This applies in many different areas of the securities laws, whether it's, whatever, the structure itself. Even the actual idea of whether you're selling security or not, the structure itself doesn't matter. They're going to look straight through that and they're going to say, are you getting compensated for a referral? Are you getting compensated to raise money? A good example of that is people try and get around that through marketing agreements or consulting agreements. Those are probably the two most common, and certainly a red flag for the SEC that's on their watch list or whatever. So people try and do, not so much the employees are kind of more of a pain way, but the one that actually gets used quite a bit is this marketing agreement. Hey, let's enter into a marketing agreement. I'll pay you $50,000 and you agree to market me, when really what they're doing is just referring somebody over and getting compensated, and they're calling it a marketing agreement or calling it a consulting agreement. But the SEC's onto those as well. So no, there's going to be no way for you to be able to compensate people for referrals unless they're an actual broker dealer, which obviously they're not going to be. The only other way you could theoretically do it is and there's some states have finder rules or whatever, but the finder rules, they're not tied to compensation at all. So for example, a classic example of a finder rule that would probably work is if you gave me a list of 10 investors and I paid you $5,000 for that list. You're not getting compensated that $5,000, whether they invest or non-invest. You're just handing me a list. You're finding these individuals for me, and I'm emailing them myself. And you're getting compensating for finding those people, not whether they invest or not. But most people that I know don't want to do it that way. They want to make it, connecting to the transaction, whether it's a converted lead or money in the bank or whatever. So the bottom line there is basically, unfortunately, no. All right. Yeah, go ahead. Follow up. Go ahead.
I guess
I didn't get your name. Sorry.
All right, it's Jeffrey Pollux.
Jeffrey. Hey, Jeff.
All good. So theoretically speaking, if I were to actually be employed by that sponsor's team, is there any way at that point? I'm not, not playing games, but if theoretically somebody on the sponsorship team, that was kind of their role, was to find the
whether you're an employee or an affiliate, it doesn't matter. You still would have to do three things. Number one, you would have to not be receiving transaction-based compensation. That's where the referral fee goes out the window. Number two, you'd have to be doing what we call substantial duties, which again, another nebulous term, but you've got to be actually doing something, whether it's underwriting, due diligence, asset management, investor relations, something that's substantial. And then the majority of your time, your primary role has to be those substantial duties. So you can't spend, 80% of your time raising money and then 20% of your time doing whatever these substantial duties are. And I've heard through the grapevine, which I haven't seen it anywhere, so I'm guessing it's one of these SEC staff members at one of these web seminars that they sometimes do, that purely doing an investor relations role is probably not going to be sufficient of a substantial relationship, especially the way that most people do, investor relations. So no transaction-based compensation, substantial duties, and your primary role has to be those substantial duties. If you can fulfill those three requirements, then you're going to be considered as part of that issuer, and you'd be eligible for what we call the issuer exemption. Yeah, go ahead, Kurt.
Oh, okay. How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Excellent. Thanks. So my question that I wrote in the chat was, is an unsolicited website inquiry considered advertised, quote unquote, because you have a website out there that generally pertains to the subject matter, and the inquiry was about investing?
Yeah, so your website is General soliciting
Advertising.
or advertising. Yeah. So you should be, if you're doing a 506B, you've got to be very careful of what you put on your website or your, just like social media. Whenever I usually talk about it in terms of social media posts or social media info, or maybe a podcast, but your website, as you mentioned. And in fact, that was one of the things that these guys acknowledged, was the Citizen VC company. It's like, hey, they acknowledged that the website wasn't private. It was obviously anybody can stumble upon it. And so what they ended up doing is they would have a password protected tab. That's what you can do on a website. That's what you should do on a website. And that's what these guys did. Said, hey, obviously the website's, anybody can find it, but the website's very generic. It's got information about the company, you know, their goals and all that stuff. And it's got some content, some value added, you know, maybe some reports or just, you know, educational content. But if you want to find out about investments and specific, you know, stuff like that, that's going to be a password protected tab. And in order to get that password, obviously you've got to establish that pre-existing substantive relationship to be eligible for that tab. So yeah, you got to be super careful. We tend to do some, you know, for our clients, we'll take a look at the websites and you want to have disclaimers in there, but be super careful. And that's one of the reasons I think you got to be super careful also in terms of email captures on that website. If you're going to, I recommend having an email capture on there, but it's got to be something that you capture from, you know, a report or maybe it's a video you did or a webinar or whatever, but that's what you're trying to capture on the website. Once you capture that information and have their email, well, now you can go through these 8 steps that we talked about, right? So you go through those 8 steps. Right. What I see a lot of times on the websites is, hey, if you're interested in investing, contact us or whatever. You've got more questions about investing. I mean, once you start talking about investing and trying to capture people through the website, through investing terminology, I think you get into trouble. But if you try and get a capture because you've got you know, why Jacksonville, Florida is the greatest market today to invest in, and you've got a report of the top 10 markets to invest in 2023, you know, knock yourself out, get that contact information, and then take them through the 8 steps.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kurt. Good to see you. Ashley
you.
in the house. Hey, Ash. Do you want to
Hey, how you doing?
How are you? It's good to see you.
It's great to see you.
So do I think compensation rules, that you heard some rumor about that? Let's make sure we're on the same page. So back probably 2 years ago now, it was right before the change over 2 years ago now. There was a proposed rule. I don't know if this is the one you're talking about. So there was a proposed rule, which was a fantastic rule, by the way, where it said, hey, let me just backtrack. There's a huge gap. This probably, you know this, but there's a huge gap because on the one hand, you can't pay people to raise money for you, right? Unless they're a broker dealer. But the problem is the broker dealers, they don't want to get out of bed unless they're raising 50 million, 100 million, or, you know, I have seen some that are doing less and less, but there's a huge gap. And I think the SEC was recognizing that, and they were trying to address that. And so they came out with a proposed rule that essentially said, we are going to allow you to be able to refer people to your deals in exchange for transaction based. So you could pay them a commission. Now, without having to have a broker dealer license. Now, there were some restrictions in there. You had to obviously disclose it. It had to be a written agreement. You definitely had to disclose the compensation. Obviously, that'll be influential on that. You could only do it with accredited investors. You couldn't advertise. It's not like I can go advertise, get a bunch of, you know, like for your deals, for example, I couldn't go run ads, get 1,000 investors and say, hey, Ash, I got 1,000 investors if one of them invest. But if I had, be great for me, for example, like, or for CPAs, especially CPAs or wealth strategists, like, hey, I could literally say, hey, I've got a client, they're looking for a real estate investment. Let me refer them to Ashley. And hey, if they invest, you can, you know, you pay me a 2% commission or 5,000 or whatever it is, as long as they're accredited. So there were some restrictions, but that was tabled. I mean, there was a proposed rule. It's like a good, I don't know, it's like 300 pages or something. It's a very detailed proposed rule. And then what typically happens with the proposed rules is they put them out to the marketplace and they look for comments from people like me, you, any participants in the market, come out with their comments and say, oh, this is stupid, or this is a great idea, or maybe it shouldn't just be accredited, it should be like whatever they come up with. And then usually they come out with the final rule, usually about 9 months after that. You know, there's a proposed rule, there's like a 60-day comment period, and then they review it. It's a whole process. But you know, the nine months came and went, a year came and went. And, you know, there's a change in the administration. I mean, that got passed during the prior SEC commissioner, and it's just been tabled. It's not on the agenda. They have no, you know, and I've had some, I haven't called them specifically. I don't have a direct line to the SEC or anything, but I do know some colleagues who've basically asked about it. And the answer has been, we'll get to it when we get to it. So honestly, my personal opinion is I don't think it's going to get addressed until there's a new administration. It doesn't seem to be a priority for the current SEC commissioner. It's not on the current agenda. So I've given up on it. Let's put it that way. I was talking about it a lot probably a year ago and say, hey, any day now it could come out the final rule. But now I think it's going to get tabled, and I think it'll come one day, but probably not until the next administration comes in and there's a new SEC commissioner, is my guess.
Do you think the influence of the whole FTX situation and with all the celebrity influencers is going to have an impact as well on that ruling or any other SEC rules?
I don't know. I mean, all these lawsuits that are going out with all these lawsuits from the Tom Brady's, I don't think those go anywhere. I mean, you're a paid spokesman. There's actually very clear rules on paying spokespersons, but they already have a bunch of those rules, actually, because we've got some. Obviously, you're one of them, but there's influencer clients that we have that are wanting to make what can they say and not say. There's already called these anti-touting rules. There's already regulations in place that say you've got to disclose. If you're an influencer, if you're touting some stock or some investment, that you've got to disclose whether you're getting compensated, whether you have an interest in it, if you're an influencer. Otherwise, people just may think that, hey, you're just. And there's been a lot of high-profile cases already. Floyd Mayweather got into hot water. DJ Khaled got into hot water where they were pumping. I think it was crypto stuff, and they were pumping it on their social media, not saying that they actually were getting, I think it wasn't a ton of money, but I think DJ Khaled and Mayweather, they got maybe it's like $300,000 or $500,000 that they got paid. And so they got nailed for that. They had to return the $300,000. They got a penalty, which was about the same amount. So I think it was like 100% penalty. And then they were prohibited from touting again. So there's already rules in place for influencers. So I haven't given too much thought of whether the FTX thing specifically, I mean, I know it's going to bring on regulation in general, but I don't know. I think the FTX thing, from my personal opinion on that, is that was just, it just happened to be crypto related, but it's, it's just good old fashioned fraud. That's just good old fashioned fraud. I don't think it could have been any industry. It happened to be crypto. But I don't know if the FTX thing is going to have an influence, but I do know there's going to be a lot of regulation coming down on the crypto side. But again, from what we do, what we're doing in terms of the crypto, not to go on, I don't want this to be a crypto. I'm happy to talk about the crypto thing, but the rules, again, SEC is very clear. And Commissioner Gelson said, hey, look, there's no ambiguity when it comes to our stuff. There might be ambiguity as to, DeFi and other stuff, but when it comes to tokenizing securities offerings, like what we're doing, it's the same stuff. 506B, 506C, there's a lot more Reg A's because people want to advertise them, and there's a secondary market. All that stuff is the same rules apply. It's Reg D, it's Reg A, it's the Securities Act of 1933 and 1934. It's these other areas of crypto that are a little bit more nebulous, that they're looking for clarity. What we do, it's pretty clear as to what we can and cannot do, and it's exactly the same things that we're doing now. It's selling a security, and we just happen to have a digital representation of it in the form of a token. But in terms of the securities laws, there's really no ambiguity for us. Let me read this first, see if I can do that. For a fund of funds investing in a 506B, can we post details about our investment on social media once the deal is closed? Not sure what the relevance of the fund of funds. So that the question is, can you post about the details of the investment on social media once the deal is closed? So one thing I want you guys to be careful about is there's a difference between the deal closing, meaning the property closing, and then the offering closing, right? It's not uncommon for you to close on a deal and then still have to raise another 50 grand or 100 grand or whatever in order to sort of finish up your raise. Those are problematic. So if you close on your deal and then you start celebrating on Facebook or social media, on podcasts, that, hey, we've closed this deal, and it's a 506B, and then a week later you're still taking money from investors to close out the deal, that's going to be a violation of 506B. If you completely close out the deal, I'm not a huge fan of those post deals, because I think there is an argument potentially that you could be considered conditioning the market, especially if you have another deal right around the corner. And that does matter. Like if your next deal doesn't happen for another 6 to 9 months, then I'm less concerned about it. But if you've already gotten the deal in place and you're like, hey, we closed on this deal, and and then the main issue with those posts actually is like they celebrate, hey, we closed on this deal, high five, And then inevitably there's something else at the bottom that says, if you want to learn how to get into the next one, or if you want to learn more about what we do, call us here or whatever. So I would recommend, since it only happens, 1, 2, or 3 times a year, or however many deals you're closing, I would probably recommend running that post by your securities counsel. That's the easiest thing. I mean, we do that all the time. If you've got a particular post that you're concerned about, I want to take a look at, just send it to us. If we're your counsel or whoever your attorney is, send it to them. Hey, I want to send this post. Are you okay with it? And if they're okay with it, then that's great. But it is going to depend a little bit more on the language, what your situation is. Do you have another deal right around the corner? Or is this the only securities deal you've ever going to do, and you're not going to ever do another one again? Then that's less of an issue. Let's go back. Lots of questions today. Well, I really appreciate you guys here. Vincent, is this when a syndicator uses crowdfunding? Is this when a syndicator uses crowdfunding? Vincent, I'm not sure I'm following on you on first of all, what this is. Unless you're talking about the 8 steps. I mean, crowdfunding is a term of art as well. I mean, crowdfunding to me means syndicating. So just aggregating capital and raising capital to go do a deal. So this particular topic of the 8 steps is when you're specifically doing a 506B offering, because when you're doing a 506B offering, you are prohibited from advertising or generally soliciting. That's the main prohibition. 506B is a great exemption, but you cannot advertise. And so one of the ways you can show that you did not advertise to, this particular investor is by showing that you had established a pre-existing substantive relationship with that investor. And these are 8 steps that you can take to establish that substantive relationship. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that. BD offering closing. Yeah. I mean, so if you're BD, this is just going, the answer I gave last time. I'm just always weary about those post-closing posts. I'm not a huge fan of them in general. Merry Christmas. Thanks, Alan. Got to run. Michael, 10 deals a year. That's 10 posts, buddy. You got to show. Do you have another question? Your hand is still up.
Yeah, I had another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was at the family office meeting last week in Fort Lauderdale and was speaking to a guy that says that everybody should do a 506C rev something or another, and where you can set it up as a 506C and do a rev something where you're crowdfunding the rest of it literally online.
When you say rev, what do you mean by?
I don't
rev?
know what I haven't gotten to reconnect with this gentleman yet, but he said there's a way to do or was it a 506? Yeah, 506B with a rev D or something like that, where you can crowdfund with sophisticated investors via a crowdfunding website. Have you heard of anything like that?
I mean, what he's probably talking about, it is not many people do this. So there's 2 things you can do, which is actually interesting. One is you can do what we have called it. We can do concurrent raises, right? So you can do theoretically, you can do a 506B and a 506C at the same time, as long as they're sort of in the same deal, as long as they're sufficiently, different. And so what he's probably talking about is you could probably do a 506B. And maybe it's a Reg CF that he's talking about, the crowdfunding regulation thing.
I think you might be right on that.
I don't know too many people's doing regs. Reg CF's another exemption, just like a 506B, 506C, Reg A. You've got this Reg CF, which is regulated crowdfunding. I think they did I don't have any clients doing it just because of the compliance cost. But essentially you can raise up, it used to be $1 million and I think they raised the limit just recently, but it's not a ton, which is why if you're raising, what you're raising, Michael, you're not going to cut it. But if you're short, if you're short, theoretically you can do that. There's just a lot of limitations. I mean, there's a lot of compliance. You've got to have a registered portal. You can't just use your own website. It's got to be either a broker dealer or an SEC approved portal. You can kind of advertise, but not really. You can kind of give the basics of it, and then you got to have a link to that portal. The portal actually does all the advertising. There's limitations as to, if they're non-accredited, which you can have non-accredited. There's massive, almost ridiculous. The investor can only invest, I believe it's $2,000 or 5% of their net worth or income, whichever is lowest. So it's a small number, right? Even though you can do it. And then depending on your net worth and, how much you're how much you're raising will depend on, do you need to provide audited financials to this website? Because if you're raising less than 250 grand, you don't have to, but if you're raising, 750 to $1 million, you're going to have to do audited financials for the thing. It's just a pain, and there's obviously costs involved. So I don't know too many people that do that. My favorite thing, Michael, I don't know if you're aware of, that I talked about actually on episode 1 of the little plug for episode 1, is you can pivot. You can start a syndication with a 506B,
And go to
right? And then at some point terminate it in the same deal, and then flip the next day and start raising, and then start advertising and at that point take accrediteds only and verify them. But that's something that some people are starting to take more and more advantage of. That's been around almost 2 years now. I think March it'll be 2 years. But yeah, theoretically you could do a concurrent raise. I would try and do it as different as possible. So for example, you could do an equity raise for under a 506B, and then maybe the other one is a loan, right, debt piece, or maybe if you're in my world, I've got clients who do mobile home parks, right, and so they'll raise money for the parks, but maybe they want to have a separate little raise for, in order to acquire the mobile homes to add to the pad. So maybe that becomes your reg CF, and you raise $1 million. But it's got a lot of hair on it, and like I said, I don't have too many people who use it, but it's definitely an option.
Okay.
I always do concurrent
you.
stuff. Yeah, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Ashley. All right. Anybody else got questions? Otherwise, I'm gonna let you guys go early, but I'm happy to stick around if you got questions on anything. And but hey, I'm super appreciative of you guys. It's been 42 episodes. I never really realized it was going to go this well, but anyway, I will definitely be doing this next week. So I'm not sure what the topic will be, but looking forward to next week. And in the meantime, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, happy Hanukkah. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you guys.